Wounds threaten to rip right back open if we do not strongly defend democracy in the United States of America.
And to say that at the end, the fact that we need to strongly defend democracy in America is the overall point. The flimsy veneer of democracy that we have has been one of the main things that has allowed us to not fall directly into the hellscape that the right wing wants us to be in, right? Because we ostensibly have given people the right to vote, to make their voice heard, in spite of all the voter suppression measures that the right wing is employing against black, brown people, and essentially just anybody that wouldn't vote for them. Right wingers very clearly understand that democracy is not conducive to their gaining of power because they aren't popular. They are hateful, they hate themselves, they hate everyone else around them. They want everybody else's lives to be worse and their lives to be better. Who the they are in that instance is going to be white people, and what constitutes white people is whatever the fuck they want it to be at any given time, because obviously through history it's changed. AOC being based again? Imagine my shock. What is this? Minute long. AOC calls out the source of the political violence in America. I would imagine this is in response to the Pelosi thing? Maybe not. I don't know. Let's see.
Also,
my right ear loves this
having
audio.
to acknowledge a very central fact that reporting from the FBI and even in terms of Homeland Security, Jamie and I sit, and he is the chair and I'm the vice chair of the House Oversight Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and we've held hearings on this, and there is absolutely no doubt that the data shows that the vast majority of incidents of domestic terror come from white nationalism.
True.
And that we are really, truly facing an environment of fascism and in the United States of America. This type of intimidation at the polls brings us to Jim Crow. It brings us back and harkens back to a very unique form of American apartheid that is not that long past ago. And we have never fully healed from it. And those wounds threaten to rip right back open if we do not strongly defend democracy in the United States of America.
True. Holy. If I'm AOC, I'm a little worried right now. Well, she's been worried. They would have killed her on January 6th if they found her. You understand that, right? And she was aware of that. She's been known about her security concerns, I'm pretty sure. It is true. It does seem like she is one of the few politicians who's been willing to call this out. It is absolutely true, by the way. I've looked at the data. I've shown the data many times in the past when it comes to the prevalence of domestic terror and who does it in the United States of America. So I posted it some time ago, November 14, 2020, and also May 14, 2022. This was after the Buffalo mass shooting, which was a mentally ill right-winger. I should not say mentally ill. He was probably cognizant of what he was doing. Sorry. Was a standard right-winger, it would seem, who literally drove miles out of his way to a town he did not live, specifically to target a town that had a higher population of black people, went to a grocery store that was famous for being frequented by a lot of black people, and then killed a bunch of black people. He cited the Great Replacement conspiracy theory in his manifesto, etc., etc. So I wrote, in wake of the Buffalo mass shooting, friendly reminder that right-wing extremists are responsible for the vast majority of extremist-related murders in the U.S. over the last decade. The right wing commits the majority of domestic terrorism. This is true, by the way. Oh, there's actually been updated ones, too. Domestic, so this is from the ADL. There are some right-wingers that don't like the ADL, and you gotta wonder why that might be. Domestic extremist-related killings in the U.S. by perpetrator affiliation, 2010 to 2019, 435 total deaths. Right-wing extremists are responsible for the vast majority of extremist-related murders over the last decade. So we've got 76% right-wing extremism, all movements. Of these 435 total deaths, right-wing extremism. Left-wing extremism, including anarchists and black nationalists, that's 3%. And you could make an argument that black nationalists are actually right-wing. I think a lot of people would make that argument, but I think they're specifically in the context of this graph trying to separate white supremacy, white nationalism, and that kind of shit. But it does say all movements. I don't know why you would include it. I don't know. They also put domestic Islamist extremism, 20%, but that's also right-wing. Islamist extremists are almost overwhelmingly fundamental Islamist extremists are right-wing. That's not to say that all people who practice Islam are. Talking about the people doing these actions are right-wing. So you add that to the 76% as well. Other miscellaneous extremism, 1%. So if we just, allow the black nationalists to be lumped in with left-wing extremism, and you combine the domestic Islamist extremism with right-wing extremism, all movements, you get 96%. 96% of domestic extremist-related killings in the U.S. are right-wing. Right-wingers, the right wing, conservatism, Republicans, are the biggest domestic threat to the heartland. It's been the case for a long time. See also Charlottesville, see also the Buffalo mass shooting, see also the list goes on. Right-wing extremist-related killings in the U.S. by perpetrator affiliation 2010 to 2019, 3 out of 4 killings committed by right-wing extremists in the U.S. are committed by white supremacists. So we're getting a little bit more specific. Of 330 total deaths, white supremacy accounted for 78% of them. Anti-government extremism accounted for 17%. Incel extremism accounted for 2%. And anti-abortion and other right-wing extremism accounted for 2%. 3 out of 4 killings by right-wing extremists in the U.S. are committed by white supremacists. And 76% charitably, or 96% of domestic extremist-related killings in the U.S. are right-wingers. This is factual information. And for any right-winger who doesn't like the ADL for whatever reason, the Southern Poverty Law Center also has similar data to back this up. Now, of course, if you don't like the Southern Poverty Law Center for whatever reason, you're going to have to find another source that would still back this up, but that's made by white people instead, or who you assume to be. I went on to say, to people like the Buffalo shooter, whiteness, quote-unquote, will always be at threat, quote-unquote, because it's an arbitrarily defined term. Its arbitrarity allows for people who weaponize so-called great replacement rhetoric to always have a way to spur on bigoted legislation and acts like we just saw in Buffalo. And that's true as well. We've talked about this in the past, where whiteness, quote-unquote, is not an actual ethnicity, it's not an actual race. It is a classification of people that is amoebic, that is ever-changing. And the common example that I always go to, in the past, Polish people were not considered white. German people were not considered white. They were considered so-called swarthy. Eventually, especially after slavery was ostensibly abolished, once black people had, some more emancipation, some more rights in society, even after segregation, the white people, quote-unquote, in America started feeling the pressure of black people being able to vote. Black people being able to participate in civil society, like what used to be exclusively the domain of white people and white landowning people. Now they are able to do that and be more politically active, black and brown people, so they needed to enfranchise more people that are similar in skin tone, at least, in a lot of ways, to so-called white people, like Italian people, like Irish people, like Polish people, etc., into the classification of so-called white to beef up their numbers because they were losing in numbers. That's why that happened. And they manipulated people and propagandized to those people of those aforementioned groups to essentially produce infighting between what was previously groups not considered white. Those black and brown people, to you white passing Germans, Italians, Polish people, whatever, those people are the bad ones. You want to be with us, the white people, because we've had all the power and we'll protect you as long as you're willing to be bigoted against the black and brown people and help us keep them down. That's the whole idea. This is the history of the United States of America. The idea that whiteness is like a thing that needs to be protected has always been just rhetoric. It's always been an amoebic term to be used to facilitate all manner of oppression of people not deemed white. It also works in reverse. Eventually, if the so-called white people that have the power in this country were able to attain that white ethno-state, it's going to be the case that those now considered white people, Italians, Germans, etc., would no longer be considered white anymore because it's inherently exclusionary. White people is not a classification of people that is like a constant. Because the definition shifts to include more people, it can also shift to include less, right? The Nazis in Germany had the Aryan, blonde hair, blue-eyed Übermensch idea. Whatever that is in the right-wing iteration of fascism, will be what it is. And eventually more and more people will be excluded and left out until the purity of that so-called white race ends up essentially imploding on itself like it has in the past, because it's just not a sustainable model. So the idea that it could be in any way considered outlandish or outrageous for AOC to be saying these things is ridiculous, because it's abundantly clear at this point. If Donald Trump, a neo or proto-fascist, was anything to go by, the ways that he restricted immigration, called Mexicans rapists, criminals, I assume some are good people, meaning that he thinks the majority of Mexicans are rapists and criminals, the border camps, which were built by Obama and Biden, but were exacerbated in their use under Trump and also made worse in a variety of other ways. I'm not a big fan of Biden or Obama either, in that realm and in many others. The way that he disallowed trans people from being able to participate in the military, to stop them from doing that, essentially is saying that trans people are not the same as cis people, I guess, in this case, in the way that they're like not capable of being that bare minimum level of citizen, which is enlisting in the military and serving your country and literally putting your body on the line for the defense, ostensibly, of that country, right? The idea that proto-fascism, or like the explicit and proud fascism of somebody like Ron DeSantis, who is currently undergoing a genocide of trans people in Florida and has spurred that on around the rest of the Bible Belt and a variety of other places in the United States and states outside of the United States. There's also been a lot of influence because of what's going on in Florida, where they're trying to medically detransition all trans youth, also medically detransition eventually all trans adults, which they have expressed interest in doing in the past, off of complete lies and misinformation that have been refuted time and again, but they don't care. They use bureaucratic methods of subverting democracy, which DeSantis is a big fan of doing, in order to actually do all these things, like going through the medical board and not allowing people the ability to vote on it and all this kind of shit. That is also a big threat, and you have to understand that Ron DeSantis is not a big fan of non-white people, right? This is the same problem. This is the same issue. And the rhetoric that right-wingers engage in, like Tucker Carlson, like Ben Shapiro, like Matt Walsh, like Steven Crowder, like Jesse Waters, like Sean Hannity, all these right-wing pundits, the rhetoric that they traffic in contributes to this directly. You can easily track it. The things that Tucker Carlson says, the water that he carries for white supremacists, white nationalists, the fact that he spreads and champions the so-called Great Replacement conspiracy theory has led to this shit. He has been cited, I'm pretty sure, in the past by these people who have either idealized about it or actually done these violent acts. This is what it leads to, and they understand that. That's what stochastic terrorism is. The bomb threats on the Boston Children's Hospital and the death threats that children's hospitals across the country have gotten at the hands of Matt Walsh, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro's lies and fear-mongering about these hospitals. That's what that is. That's what it leads to. You'll notice here in this one, anti-abortion and other right-wing extremism 2%. You know, George Tiller the baby killer, Bill O'Reilly, he literally called that doctor who just happened to perform abortions, Tiller the baby killer, so many times over the course of so much time that somebody actually went out and assassinated the man. They killed Dr. George Tiller because he just happened to perform abortions. He just happened to perform family planning and reproductive health care for his patients, right? Also, the fire bombings of abortion clinics that have happened at the hands of anti-abortion right-wing extremists. Literal domestic terrorism. There's a very clear through line to the words and rhetoric used and the lies told by these right-wingers that I mentioned before, and the figures we're looking at right now. AOC is 100% correct in saying that as well. We'll listen to it again because I just want to hear it again to make sure I'm getting it all. But I'm pretty sure I've understood what she's trying to say.
The reporting from the FBI and even in terms of Homeland Security, Jamie and I sit, and he is the chair and I'm the vice chair of the House Oversight Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and we've held hearings on this, and there is absolutely no doubt that the data shows that the vast majority of incidents of domestic terror come from white nationalism, and that we are really truly facing an environment of fascism. And in the United States of America, this type of intimidation at the polls brings us to Jim Crow. It brings us back and harkens back to a very unique form of American apartheid that is not that long past ago. And we have never fully healed from it. And
Reconstruction was a complete farce. The idea that Reconstruction was in any way adequate is ridiculous. Abraham Lincoln was on a fairly decent path, I guess, but then he got yoinked by John Wilkes Booth. Specifically, most historians, I'm pretty sure there's been a bit more consensus. A lot of people, like when I was taught in school about John Wilkes Booth, we just learned that he killed Abraham Lincoln, and we didn't really get much of the motivation why. Turns out it seems that John Wilkes Booth was not a big fan of, like, the freeing of the slaves, for instance, or the actual goals of Reconstruction post the Emancipation Proclamation. So he yoinked Abraham Lincoln, and then Abraham Lincoln's VP, who was a white supremacist, took over and essentially neutered Reconstruction to the point where the Civil War, the United States did not learn any lessons from it. And here we are now. Black people, brown people are still in many ways not equal under the interpretation of the law. They still suffer all manner of oppression at the hands of a variety of different state and non-state actors. The over-policing of black and brown communities and the criminalizing of, for instance, marijuana and the throwing of people in jail, as the aide to Richard Nixon literally admitted, was simply just a way to disenfranchise from voting the anti-war left and black and brown people, because they can't just not allow them to vote anymore. So then they criminalize a thing, make it a federal crime. Once people are convicted of federal crimes, can't vote anymore. Bada bing, bada boom. And also 13th Amendment, which ostensibly made illegal slavery, still allows for slavery as long as it's for punishment of a crime, right? So there you go. The United States benefits a lot from its slave labor in its prisons. Reconstruction was an absolute failure, and it did not even go close to as far enough. Black people did not get their 40 acres and a mule. They didn't get shit but spit on, and that's it. And it's fucked. The idea that we are in any way a civilized country is ridiculous. And it's all because of the right-wingers, the conservatives, the Republican Party, and the pundits online and on TV who contribute to the conditions that make these figures a thing to begin with.
Wounds threaten to rip right back open if we do not strongly defend democracy in the United States of America.
And to say that at the end, the fact that we need to strongly defend democracy in America is the overall point. Democracy and the flimsy kind of democracy we have right now. Now, we live in a republic. It's not a democracy. The flimsy veneer of democracy that we have has been one of the main things that has allowed us to not fall directly into the hellscape that the right wing wants us to be in, right? Because we ostensibly have given people the right to vote, to make their voice heard, in spite of all the voter suppression measures that the right wing is employing against black, brown people, and essentially just anybody that wouldn't vote for them, the gerrymandering that is also acting as voter suppression, the electoral college, which was literally just a participation trophy for wealthy slaveholders, and still now acts as a participation trophy for the Republican Party so that they can actually win elections, because if it was a popular vote, they wouldn't, because they are not popular. Right-wingers very clearly understand that democracy is not conducive to their gaining of power because they aren't popular. They are hateful, they hate themselves, they hate everyone else around them. They want everybody else's lives to be worse and their lives to be better. Who the they are in that instance is going to be white people, and what constitutes white people is whatever the fuck they want it to be at any given time, because obviously through history it's changed. And that's it. They are hateful, they are ugly in the way that they think and act, and nobody likes them. But the only reason they are able to win is because of the fact that they have worked tirelessly for years, going through the judicial branch, going through the voter suppression, gerrymandering I've talked about before, the electoral college, and a variety of other fuckery that we actually haven't been able to properly address. The only reason they're in any way relevant is because of the fact that they've been subverting democracy for so long. If we cannot defend democracy, we no longer have a country. You know how right-wingers are always saying, oh, well, if we don't have a border, you don't have a country. If we don't have democracy, motherfucker, we don't got a country. We have authoritarian rule by a bunch of petulant fucking piss baby dumbasses on the right, and they're just going to make everybody's lives worse in order to make themselves feel better about their insecurity. That's it. They hate everybody and themselves, and because they hate themselves, they take it about on others instead of introspecting and actually trying to make themselves better people. That's it. We need democracy in order to have this country. It is impossible otherwise. And AOC saying this is incredibly fucking brave because of the amounts of hate that she gets. Because of the fact that she is a Latina woman in America who holds elected office and is very popular and talks that shit, they don't like her. They absolutely would have taken her life on January 6th if they found her. They wanted to do it to Mike Pence, and he was ostensibly on their side and is to this day also carrying water for Trump still, even though he essentially endorsed Mike Pence's, removal by the January 6th protesters, the rioters, the insurrectionists, right? She puts herself in a lot of harm's way and is, requires security detail for a reason because of all this. And she's not the only one as well. Ilhan Omar, a Muslim woman in America Literally, during January 6th, we found out after the additional video was unearthed in the most recent January 6th committee hearing, actually went to the security room or whatever that the higher-ups in the Democratic Party were taken to, like Nancy Pelosi, like Chuck Schumer. She was brought there specifically because of the amount of death threats that she gets and the threats on her life that she gets. She was actually brought with them instead of going to whatever other rooms that there were because of that. It was cited because of the death threats for her safety that she went with them instead. Rashida Tlaib, Pramila Jayapal, obviously like people like Bernie Sanders to a lesser extent because he is seen as white by most people, but of course he's Jewish. A lot of different people in the Democratic Party, but AOC is one of the loudest and one of the most popular because she knows how to be a popular person, and you need that as a politician. You know, funnily enough, being a public figure, you have to kind of be popular with the public in order to win, unless you're a Republican. Imagine if the Dems did anything cool or anything at all helpful. Yeah, well, that's the problem. On the one hand, they're neutered for the fact that, you know, we don't have an actual democracy in this country, and the Republicans have so many participation trophies that they're able to actually have power and stop Democrats from doing anything. And also the current crop of Democrats that hopefully more people like AOC start to replace more and more are completely ineffectual. People like, Dianne Feinstein or Chuck Schumer or, Nancy Pelosi, these people who are good at raising money are not necessarily as good as driving messaging, driving rhetoric, controlling the narrative, and delivering an idea of what they want to do, of how they want to make the world a better place and how bad Republicans are to the broader public. They're not good at being popular. AOC is, and she has good politics to boot. You might not agree with everything that she talks about. You might not agree with very much of it at all, but you have to understand that she knows how to be a popular person, and you need to do that in politics. It's just the name of the game. The biggest problem Dems have is that they're liberals, obviously, or like center-right, like pseudo-liberal leaning conservatives, and they are completely feckless, and as we've always understood, if you're a leftist, liberalism is not sufficient to fight back against fascism. Historically, it is not. You need a further left approach in order to deal with fascism. They are just completely feckless. They hate winning. They don't like to win. Anytime a Democrat like, Nancy Pelosi or Dianne Feinstein or whatever ends up winning, it's a fluke. It's a mistake. They would much rather just lose forever, apparently. At least that's how they act. And whenever they win, they just, they're in there not really doing much. It's some shit. So I guess for as much as we can, talk about all this, you should definitely be making a plan to vote. It's coming up very soon. Ideally, you would have already registered to vote. As I always say, voting is the bare minimum civic engagement. You should be doing more. If it is not overwhelmingly difficult for you to vote because you have multiple jobs or multiple dependents like kids or whatever you got to take care of, and it's actually difficult for you to vote, I can understand having difficulty doing it. But if it is not overwhelmingly difficult for you to vote, or even if it's a little hard, but not like overwhelmingly so, you should be going out and voting for the least bad option. In the primary, vote for the best option in the Democratic Party. Has to be the Democratic Party because we have a first past the post voting system that does not allow third parties to actually be viable. Until we can move to another system, that's what you got. So vote for the best option in the Democratic primary. Hopefully they win, and then vote for them in the general. If they lose, vote for the least bad option in the general, which is always going to be a Democrat. It is always better to have a do-nothing Democrat in office, at least stopping Republicans from doing worse shit, than a Republican actively trying to kill you. That's it. And then you have to be doing more than that. You have to be doing advocacy, you have to be doing activism, you have to be doing organizing, you have to be trying to form community networks, because shit, very clearly could easily go bad very quickly in this country because of climate change, because of the Republican Party, because of the ineffectuality of the Democrats. You gotta be doing it. You have to be organizing and building these dual power structures. The entire point of harm reduction in the community organizing sense is to make up for the inadequacies of the state. So if you are volunteering in a soup kitchen, if you're doing advocacy for the houseless, if you are doing advocacy for marginalized groups, if you are getting together in your communities for even something like a free public library or a community garden, you are doing harm reduction and trying to make up for the inadequacies of the state. In an ideal world, in a world that has nation states anyway, the state would be able to provide for people the things that you are trying to provide in that way. But currently it's not. That is what harm reduction is. Voting for the least bad option is also that form of harm reduction. It's just not as necessarily impactful. Obviously, if you could do stuff in your real life and help the people immediately around you, that is going to be more immediately impactful, but you should still be voting if it's not overwhelmingly difficult for you to do. Where I live, most people vote, otherwise they get a fine. I wish we had compulsory voting. I wish we forced people to vote in this country. I don't care who you vote for, but you gotta vote. You could show up in voting day, but obviously it would have to be like a national holiday and shit. You show up on voting day, you could vote for goddamn Snoopy for all I care. Just put someone in there, but ideally you'd vote for an actual option. where you lived voting day as a holiday. Yeah, imagine my shock. Who could have thought that voting was kind of an important thing to do? The reason why it's not a holiday in the United States is because the right wing and some, conservative Democrats don't want people to vote. They understand that because of all the things I talked about before, people not having the money, they're not able to vote. They understand that and they like that. That's why making, election day a holiday hasn't happened yet, because they want to reduce voter turnout. Historically speaking, the higher voter turnout is, the more likely Democrats are to win. The lower voter turnout is, the more likely Republicans are going to win. That is historical fact. So Republicans understand this. Powerful members of the Republican Party have said in the past, I'm forgetting the name immediately, Hassan brings up this clip a lot, where this dude is literally saying, we don't want a majority of people to vote. The Republicans don't. That's what he's saying. He literally just says it. Because they don't. Because they understand that the more people vote, the more likely Democrats are to win. That's why they voter suppress. That's why they gerrymander, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's why they over-criminalize marginalized communities that are more likely to vote for Democrats, not necessarily because Democrats are really good for marginalized communities, but rather because Republicans are even worse. Right? Anyway, that was a fun little impromptu segment.